The nations in this region have but to accept this fabricated regime. With independent, their behavior toward independent nations and governments is such that actually they don't have the right to live. This self-importance and arrogance, and they consider themselves as being superior to others and having a special position. This approach is the greatest, the biggest problem that facing the despotic system. And the result would be another specification, another feature of the hegemonic system will be that they do not actually accept right. They don't accept right words, and they do not recognize the rights of nations. This means they're against whatever which is right. In international equations, it has happened a lot of times. A right word or a statement has been made, but the U.S. does not accept that right statement, and they reject that statement through different methods. They do not accept right words and statements. An example of that is that the current developments, the developments facing the world, and also the developments surrounding the Iranian nuclear activity. There is something right about it. If somebody accepts right things and somebody is a logical one and accepts logic when he sees something logical, they should accept that. But hegemonic powers don't accept that. They hear right words, but they don't accept right words. As the rights of, they even do not recognize the rights of nations, that nations have the right to choose. Nations have the right to determine, have to choose the kind of economy that they favor, have to choose the kind of policy that they like. They don't recognize that right for nations. They believe that they should impose their will on others. Another result which will emanate from this is another specification of hegemony and despotism, that they consider crimes against nations as legal, and they condone crime. They turn a blind eye to crimes committed against nations. This is one of the biggest problems of despotism. I mean, in the in the latest years, even recent years, many dangerous weapons have been made, and those weapons are in the hands of despotic powers, and those weapons threaten the lives of human beings. Any person, any nation which do not listen to them and they don't follow them, then they don't value their lives. There are a lot of examples in that regard. One example is that the way that hegemonic powers treated and treat the actually Native Americans, the country whose resources, whose financial resources, geographical situation, and everything is in the hands of non-Native Americans in that region. So there have been some Native people in America. They treated those Native Americans so violently and so inhumanely that this is one of the dark points of the new American history. Many, actually, the killings that have been committed, and the same thing happened in Australia by Britons. Actually, they persecuted Native people in Australia. They hunted them like kangaroos, just for fun. They didn't value the lives of those native Australians. This is another example. There are many other examples which even in their history books, many of them have been mentioned. Another example is the chemical bombardment of two Japanese cities in 1945. Two Japanese cities came under atomic bombardment, and those cities were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And many more over the years up to now, they have because of that, they have been suffering birth defects over the years, which emanate from that chemical bombardment, and still they are suffering today. There is no, and they didn't have any logic for that action. Nice and easy, they dropped an atomic bomb on those cities. When so far only 2 times atomic bombs have been used, and that was the 2 bombs dropped on those 2 cities. And today they consider themselves as the guardians of the atomic issue in the world, and they would like this issue to slip into oblivion and be forgotten, but it won't be forgotten. They didn't value the lives of people. The lives of people have no value for these people. So despotic systems commit crimes very easily. In Vietnam, they killed people. In Iraq, their security companies and other contractors like Blackwater, they committed crimes in Iraq. In Pakistan, with drones, still they are committing crimes with drones. In Afghanistan, they bombard people and they continue to commit crimes. Anywhere they can, and anywhere which they can serve their interests, they will commit crimes, including torture, killings. The Guantanamo prison, still there are inmates there at the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. It has been for 10 or 11 years now that this detention center, which belongs to the U.S., a number of people from different parts of the world have been charged, and they are, without any trial, they are being held there under very bad and abysmal conditions, under torture. They are being held there. In Iraq, the Abu Ghraib prison was one of American prisons. They would unleash dogs on the inmates and torture them. The plundering, they easily plunder the riches of nations. Kidnapping, taking black people hostage. That is another very bad, instances which has happened in history. Actually, black people, they don't like the despotic regimes. Actually, one of the key points is that the case of slavery, actually, they would use the African people in Africa as slaves. They would bring ships from the Atlantic Ocean, and the countries like Gambia and other Western African countries, they would keep the ships there. Then they would go by at gunpoint, and they would go using different kinds of guns and all that. They would go, and by force, they would enslave people, men, women, old and young. They would enslave them, capture them, and under very tough conditions, they would carry them back with those ships to America in order to use them as slaves. And they would use them. A free person who is living in his or her town, in his or her home, they would enslave them. They would use them as slaves. Now, black people who are living in America, they are from that generation. For several centuries, actually, many things have been mentioned in books, history books. There is a book called Roots, The Roots, which reveals part of those crimes. How can one forget these crimes? Still, discrimination exists between the white people and black people in America. One of the features of the despotic system, another specification, is deception and hypocrisy. Deception and hypocrisy. The same crimes that we mentioned here, all of those crimes that they try to actually justify those crimes, and they try to make the impression that those crimes were just aimed at serving the people. This is one of the things that they do. The despotic system aims to actually to rule the world, and they use this method, the method of actually justifying the crimes and trying to make the impression that those crimes were committed just to serve the people. The attack, the chemical bombardment of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those two bombs, Americans, they apologized. You know how they justified that? They apologized and they said, although the two bombs dropped on those cities, that led to the killing of tens of thousands of people. However, those killings, whether thousands or hundreds or tens of thousands of people who were killed, it came at the price of the end of the Second World War. So they said that was the price for ending the Second World War. If we hadn't dropped those bombs, that's what Americans say, if we hadn't dropped those bombs, then the World War II would have continued. And then in that case, maybe millions of people would have been killed. So we served the humanity with that. You see, this is the way they are justifying that chemical bombardment. This is in their official statements. Now 60 years or 65 years on since then, repeatedly they are making the same statements over and over again. This is one of those deceptive and hypocritical statements made by them, and one of the outrageous lies told, but which are told by despotic systems. These bombs were dropped in the summer of 1945. It was the crime was committed in the summer of 1945. 4 months before that, that is in the spring of 1945, Hitler, who was the main pillar of the war, he had committed suicide, and 2 days before that, Mussolini, the then Italian president, who was also involved in the war, he had been arrested, and the World War had practically come to an end. There was no war at that time. And Japan, which was also involved in the war, 2 months earlier, Japan had announced that it would surrender. It was ready to surrender. So at that time, there was no war, actually. But those bombs were dropped. Why? Because they wanted to test those bombs. Those bombs had to be tested somehow. It was a weapon that they had made, and they wanted to test it. Where where were they supposed to test that? It was the best opportunity. Under the pretext of war, they dropped those bombs on the innocent people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki under the pretext of war. Then that was a test. Then they could see how it would function, how the bombs would function. This is the deceptive image, their deceptive image. They claim that they support humanity. They shot down Iranian airliner in the sky, almost 300 passengers on board. They were killed. Then even they don't apologize. And the person who was behind that crime, they even grant a medal to the person who was behind that crime. People are chanting, "Death to America," "Down with the USA."